The morning I fired up my John Deere tractor to clear the snow from my driveway in suburban Columbus, Ohio. I had no idea I was about to become the center of a war with the Meadowbrook Estate's Homeowners Association that would spiral into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. I had moved into this neighborhood 6 months earlier, purchasing a 3-acre property on the edge of the development. The previous owner had been an elderly farmer who'd held onto his land as the subdivision grew around him, and when he passed, his family sold it to me for a fair price. The property came with a barn, the tractor, and enough open space that I could finally breathe after years of living in cramped apartments downtown. My name is Oliver Barrett. I'm 34 years old, and I work remotely as a software engineer. The space was perfect for me. The snowstorm had dumped about 8 inches overnight, and by 7 in the morning, I was bundled up and heading out to the barn. The John Deere fired up with a satisfying rumble, and I attached the plow blade I'd found in the barn. The previous owner had clearly used it for this exact purpose, and the equipment was well maintained despite its age. I started at the top of my long driveway, methodically pushing snow to the sides, creating neat banks that would keep my path clear for weeks. I was about halfway done when I noticed a silver Mercedes SUV pull up at the end of my driveway. A woman in her late 40s stepped out, wearing designer boots that were completely inappropriate for the weather and a puffy white jacket that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was styled in that distinctive speak to the manager cut, and even from 50 feet away, I could see the scowl on her face. I kept working, figuring she'd realize I was busy and come back later. Instead, she started walking up my driveway, waving her arms dramatically. I sighed and put the tractor in neutral, letting the engine idle as I waited for her to reach me. "Excuse me," she shouted over the engine noise. "Excuse me, you need to stop this immediately." I pulled off my work gloves and leaned forward. "Can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Dunmore, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, she announced, as if I should be impressed. "You are in violation of multiple community guidelines, and I'm ordering you to cease this activity at once." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "I'm plowing my driveway." "What guidelines am I violating?" Patricia pulled out her phone with gloved hands, scrolling through something with exaggerated movements. Section 12, Paragraph 4. No commercial vehicles or equipment may be operated on residential properties between the hours of 7 p.m. and 9 a.m. on weekdays, or before 10 a.m. on weekends. It's currently 7:30 on a Saturday morning, and you're operating heavy machinery. "First of all," I said, keeping my voice level, "this isn't a commercial vehicle. It's a farm tractor that came with my property. Second, I'm on my own land, clearing my own driveway. How is that anyone else's business?" Her face flushed red, which I initially attributed to the cold. "Everything in Meadowbrook Estates is the HOA's business, Mr. Barrett. You agreed to our covenants when you purchased your property. This type of equipment is unsightly and creates excessive noise that disturbs the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. The previous owner used this tractor for 30 years, I pointed out. If it was a problem, someone would have said something before now. Mr. Henderson was granted a grandfather exemption due to his age and the unique circumstances of his property predating the HOA, Patricia said, her tone dripping with condescension. That exemption died with him. You are subject to all current rules and regulations. I felt my jaw clench. "Show me where it says that." She smiled triumphantly and scrolled some more. Section 3, Paragraph 8. Exemptions granted to individual homeowners are non-transferable and expire upon sale or transfer of the property. She looked up at me with barely concealed glee. You'll need to hire a professional snow removal service like everyone else, and they can't start work until after 10 a.m. on weekends." "That's ridiculous," I said. "By 10 a.m., the snow will be packed down by anyone who tries to leave. I need to get this done now so I can actually use my driveway." "Not my problem," Patricia said. "Those are the rules. Now turn off that monstrosity before I'm forced to take further action." "What kind of action?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. "I'll call the police and report you for operating dangerous equipment in violation of community standards," she said. "And I'll fine you $500 for the noise violation. Each day you continue will result in additional fines that will accumulate with interest until they become a lien on your property." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide if she was serious. The look on her face told me she was deadly serious. "Fine," I said finally. "Call the cops. Let's see what they have to say about a man plowing snow on his own property." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I won't?" "I think you'll waste their time and yours," I said. "But go ahead." Patricia's face twisted into an ugly expression and she pulled out her phone again, this time dialing. I turned the tractor back on and resumed plowing, watching in my side mirror as she stood in my driveway, apparently talking to emergency dispatch. The whole situation was so absurd I almost laughed. 20 minutes later, I'd finished the driveway and was starting on the path to my barn when a Franklin County Sheriff's cruiser pulled up. I shut down the tractor and climbed off, meeting the deputy halfway across my yard. He was a younger guy, probably in his late 20s, with a friendly face that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning," he said. "I'm Deputy Martinez. Got a call about some kind of dispute." "Morning, Deputy," I said, shaking his offered hand. "That woman over there," I pointed to Patricia, who was standing by her Mercedes with her arms crossed, "is upset that I'm plowing snow on my own property." Deputy Martinez glanced over at Patricia, then back at me, his expression carefully neutral. "She mentioned something about HOA violations and dangerous equipment." "It's a farm tractor," I said. "Came with the property. I'm just clearing my driveway so I can get to work if I need to." The deputy walked around the tractor examining it. "Looks well maintained." "You got a license to operate it?" "Don't need one for private property," I said. "I'm not taking it on public roads." He nodded slowly. "That's correct. Can I see your property deed?" I pulled out my phone and opened the photos where I'd saved digital copies of all my important documents. Deputy Martinez studied the deed carefully, then pulled out his own phone and made a note of something. "So this 3-acre parcel is entirely yours," he said. "No shared access roads or common areas?" "Nope," I confirmed. "My property line runs along the tree line to the west, the road to the east, and those survey markers to the north and south. Everything inside that is mine." Patricia must have gotten tired of waiting because she marched over, her boots crunching in the snow. "Deputy, are you going to arrest him or not? He's clearly in violation of our community rules." Deputy Martinez turned to face her, and I saw a flicker of annoyance cross his features. "Madam, HOA rules are civil matters. They're not criminal violations, and they're not something the sheriff's department can enforce." "But he's operating dangerous equipment," Patricia insisted. "On his own property," the deputy said patiently, "which is completely legal. Ohio law is clear that property owners can operate farm equipment on their own land without restriction, as long as they're not creating a hazardous situation for others. I don't see anything hazardous here." "The noise is a public nuisance," Patricia tried. "The noise ordinance in this county doesn't kick in until 10 p.m. and runs until 7 a.m. on weekdays, 8 a.m. on weekends," Deputy Martinez said. "It's now almost 8:15. So even if this was a violation, which it's not, he'd be in the clear. I couldn't help the small smile that crossed my face. Patricia looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. "So you're saying he can just ignore our community standards?" she demanded. "I'm saying that what he does on his private property, as long as it's legal under county and state law, is his business," the deputy said firmly. "If you have a dispute about HOA rules, you need to take it up in civil court. That's not a police matter." Patricia's face had gone from red to purple. "This is outrageous. I'll be filing a complaint with your supervisor." "That's your right, madam," Deputy Martinez said, completely unfazed. "You have a good day." He turned back to me and lowered his voice. "Sorry for the hassle, Mr. Barrett. You're good to continue whatever you were doing. Just keep it on your property and you're fine." "Thanks, Deputy," I said, genuinely grateful. He nodded and headed back to his cruiser. Patricia stood there for another moment, practically vibrating with rage before stomping back to her Mercedes. She peeled out of my driveway, throwing slush everywhere, and disappeared down the street. I should have known that wouldn't be the end of it. 3 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. The return address was a law office in downtown Columbus, and when I opened it, I found a formal notice of violation from the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. According to the letter, I was being fined $1,500 for willful violation of community standards, operation of prohibited equipment, and disturbing the peace. The letter went on to say that if I didn't pay within 30 days, the fine would increase by $500 per month until paid in full, and the HOA would place a lien on my property. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the letter 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. They were actually trying to fine me for plowing my own driveway. The absurdity of it was almost funny, except for the part where they were threatening my home. I did what any reasonable person would do in 2026. I took a photo of the letter and posted it on social media with a detailed explanation of what had happened. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, with people expressing outrage at the HOA's overreach. Local news stations picked up the story, and by that evening, I had reporters calling my phone asking for interviews. I agreed to talk to Channel 6, and they sent out a crew the next morning. The reporter, a sharp woman named Jennifer Garcia, listened to my story with growing interest, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I showed her the letter from the HOA's lawyer, her eyebrows shot up. "You mind if we contact the HOA for comment?" she asked. "Be my guest," I said. The segment aired that evening on the 6 o'clock news. They'd done a good job editing it, showing me with the tractor, explaining the situation clearly, and including Deputy Martinez's statement that what I was doing was perfectly legal. Then they cut to an interview with Patricia Dunmore, and I nearly fell off my couch. Patricia had apparently decided to double down. She sat in what looked like a formal office, wearing a blazer and pearls, looking every inch the professional HOA president. Mr. Barrett moved into a deed-restricted community knowing full well that there were rules and regulations designed to maintain property values and quality of life, she said smoothly. His refusal to abide by those rules affects everyone in Meadowbrook Estates. We have processes in place for requesting exemptions, which he has completely ignored in favor of doing whatever he wants. Jennifer's voice came over the footage. When we asked Miss Dunmore about the sheriff's deputy confirming the legality of Mr. Barrett's actions, she had this to say. The camera cut back to Patricia. "Local law enforcement doesn't have jurisdiction over private community agreements. Our legal counsel has assured us that our position is sound, and we will pursue all available remedies to ensure compliance." The segment ended with Jennifer standing in front of my property. The question remains, can an HOA enforce rules that restrict legal activities on private property? We'll continue to follow this developing story. Jennifer Garcia, Channel 6 News. My phone started ringing immediately after the segment ended. The first call was from my neighbor to the north, an older man named Robert Chen, who I'd spoken with a few times at the mailbox. "Oliver, it's Robert Chen from next door," he said when I answered. "I just saw the news. I wanted to tell you that I'm on your side. Patricia and that HOA board have been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Someone needs to stand up to them." "Thanks, Robert," I said, surprised by his vehemence. "I didn't realize it was that bad." "Oh, it's terrible," he said. "Last year they fined my wife $300 because she planted roses in our front yard without submitting a landscaping approval form. Roses in our own yard. We'd lived here 15 years and never had a problem until Patricia became president 3 years ago." "That's insane," I said. "You're telling me," Robert agreed. "Listen, if you need someone to testify or provide a statement about HOA overreach, I'm happy to help. So are at least a dozen other families in this neighborhood." That was interesting. "I might take you up on that," I said. "Let me see how this plays out." Over the next week, I received dozens of similar calls and emails from neighbors I'd never even met. It turned out that Patricia and the HOA board had been systematically harassing residents for years, levying fines for increasingly petty violations and threatening liens for everything from slightly overgrown grass to mailboxes that were the wrong shade of black. Several people sent me copies of their own violation notices, and I was stunned by the sheer creativity of the complaints. One family had been fined because their child's swing set was visible from the street. Another had been cited for parking their car in their own driveway instead of in the garage. I started keeping a file of all the complaints and correspondence. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, beyond just the obvious overreach. HOAs were supposed to maintain property values and handle common areas, not micromanage every aspect of residents' lives. 2 weeks after the initial incident, I received another letter, this time directly from Patricia. It was written on official HOA letterhead and informed me that I was required to attend a special disciplinary hearing at the community center on the following Saturday at 7 p.m. The letter stated that failure to attend would result in automatic escalation of fines and immediate filing of a property lien. I called Robert Chen that evening. "Did you ever have to go to one of these disciplinary hearings?" "Unfortunately, yes," he said. "When they fined us for the roses." "It's a kangaroo court, Oliver. The board sits at a table like they're judges, and you stand in front of them while Patricia reads off your violations. They don't let you bring a lawyer, they don't follow any real legal procedures, and they've already decided the outcome before you walk in. It's just theater to make you feel small." "Can I record it?" I asked. Robert laughed. "Technically, Ohio is a one-party consent state, so yes, but they'll throw a fit if they catch you." "Good to know," I said. That Saturday, I dressed in jeans and a casual button-down shirt, grabbed my phone with a full battery, and drove to the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center. It was a small building near the main entrance of the neighborhood, probably paid for with HOA dues, with a meeting room and a kitchen. When I walked in at 6:55, I found about 15 other people already there, including Robert and his wife, Margaret. Several other neighbors I recognized from their supportive messages were also present. Patricia sat at a long table at the front of the room with 4 other board members, 2 women who looked to be in their 50s and 2 men who appeared to be in their 60s. They all wore business attire, and had manila folders arranged in front of them like legal briefs. Patricia's expression when she saw me was one of barely concealed satisfaction. "Mr. Barrett," she said loudly, "thank you for attending. Please take a seat in the front row." I sat down, keeping my phone in my pocket but already recording. The audio quality would be good enough. Patricia stood up and addressed the room. "We're calling this special session of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA Disciplinary Board to order. Tonight we're addressing multiple violations by Mr. Oliver Barrett of 47 Oakwood Lane. Let the record show that Mr. Barrett is present." One of the men next to her, a thin guy with wire-rimmed glasses, was apparently taking notes. Patricia opened her folder. "Mr. Barrett, you are charged with the following violations. 1. Operation of prohibited commercial farm equipment on residential property. 2. Creating a noise disturbance before approved hours. 3. Willful disregard of HOA authority as demonstrated by your continued defiance after being formally notified of violations. 4. Damaging the reputation of Meadowbrook Estates through negative media attention. And 5. Failure to submit a property modification request for storage of said equipment." I almost laughed at point 4. "I'm being charged with talking to the news. You deliberately portrayed this HOA in a negative light, causing property values to suffer," Patricia snapped. "That affects every homeowner in this community." "I told the truth about what happened," I said. "If that portrays you negatively, maybe you should examine your actions." The crowd behind me murmured in agreement. Patricia's face tightened. "Mr. Barrett, you're here to answer for violations, not to make speeches," she said. "How do you plead to these charges?" "This isn't a court," I said calmly. "You can't charge me with anything. This is a neighborhood association that's supposed to maintain common areas and handle disputes, not prosecute residents for legal activities on their own property." One of the women on the board leaned forward. Her name tag said Susan Campbell. "Mr. Barrett, when you purchased your property, you signed a contract agreeing to abide by our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Those are legally binding." "I read that contract very carefully," I said. "There's nothing in it about farm equipment. In fact, the only mention of vehicles is a prohibition against parking non-operational vehicles on the street or storing them uncovered on front lawns. My tractor is operational. It's stored in my barn, and I only use it on my own property." Patricia shuffled her papers. "The prohibition against commercial vehicles is covered under Section 12, which specifically refers to commercial delivery trucks, taxi services, and business vehicles with advertising," I countered. "It says nothing about farm equipment on agricultural property." "And yes, my property is zoned agricultural." I checked. This was news to Patricia, apparently. She turned to the man next to her, who began frantically typing on a laptop. "Even if that's true," Patricia said, recovering quickly, "you still violated the noise ordinance and refused to comply with a direct order from the HOA president." "The deputy sheriff confirmed I wasn't violating any noise ordinance," I said. "And HOA presidents don't get to give orders that supersede county and state law." "You're being deliberately difficult," Patricia said, her voice rising. "The spirit of our rules is clear. We maintain a certain standard in Meadowbrook Estates. Your tractor, your refusal to use approved snow removal services, your entire attitude is inconsistent with that standard." "What standard?" I asked. "The standard where you fine people for planting roses, or for letting their kids have swing sets." "Because I've received about 30 emails from neighbors in the past 2 weeks, all documenting petty violations and harassment by this board." The room erupted. People started shouting their own stories, and Patricia banged a gavel on the table, which seemed absurdly theatrical. "Order! Order!" she yelled. "This hearing is about Mr. Barrett's violations, not general complaints." Robert stood up in the back. "Patricia, half this room has been fined for ridiculous reasons. Oliver's case is just the latest example of this board overstepping its authority." "When are you going to address that?" "Sit down, Robert, or you'll be next on the docket," Patricia threatened. "For what?" Robert shot back. "For speaking at an open meeting. Go ahead and try." Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. Instead, she took a deep breath and turned back to me. "Mr. Barrett, the board has reviewed your case and we've made our decision. You are fined $3,000 for the violations outlined tonight. Additionally, you are prohibited from operating your tractor on your property at any time. Violation of this order will result in additional fines of $1,000 per incident, and we will pursue a restraining order preventing you from using the equipment." I stood up slowly. "You can't do that. You have no authority to prohibit me from using my own equipment on my own land." "The deed restrictions give us exactly that authority," Patricia said triumphantly. "And if you don't like it, you can take it up with a judge, but until then you will comply." "Oh, I'll take it up with a judge," I said. "And while we're at it, I think that judge might be interested in examining the HOA's finances. I've been doing some research and I'm curious about where all these fine payments actually go." Patricia's face went pale. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," I said. "I'm stating clearly that I intend to request a full audit of the HOA's financial records, which as a homeowner, I have the right to do. I want to see exactly how much money you've collected in fines over the past 3 years, and I want to see how it's been spent." The other board members were suddenly very interested in their folders. Patricia's mouth opened and closed a few times before she found her voice. "That information is available in our annual reports," she said weakly. "Your annual reports show categories, not line items," I said. "I want a detailed forensic audit by an independent accountant, and according to Ohio HOA law, if 15% of homeowners request an audit, you're legally required to provide one." I pulled out a folder of my own, which I'd been keeping in my truck. "I have signatures from 32 homeowners, which is about 20% of Meadowbrook estates, all of them requesting a full financial audit for the past 5 years. I walked up and placed the folder on the table in front of Patricia. She stared at it like it was a snake. "This hearing is adjourned," she said abruptly, standing up. "The board will take your request under advisement." "It's not a request," I said. "It's a demand backed by legal authority. You have 30 days to comply or I'm filing a complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's office." I walked out of the community center to spontaneous applause from the residents who'd attended. Robert caught up with me in the parking lot. "That was brilliant," he said, grinning. "Did you see her face?" "I saw," I said. "Robert, I think something shady is going on with the HOA finances. When I was reviewing the annual reports, the numbers don't add up. They're collecting tens of thousands in special assessments and fines, but there's no corresponding increase in maintenance or improvements." "I've wondered about that myself," Robert said thoughtfully. "The common areas look worse than they did 5 years ago, but our dues have gone up twice." "Exactly," I said. "I'm going to file for that audit, and if I'm right about what I suspect, this is going to get a lot bigger than a dispute about a tractor." Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated quickly. Patricia sent me multiple cease and desist letters through the HOA's lawyer, all threatening immediate legal action if I didn't withdraw my audit request and pay the assessed fines. I ignored them and hired my own lawyer, a sharp attorney named Michael Torres who specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for winning cases against overreaching boards. Michael reviewed all my documentation and gave a low whistle. "Oliver, you've done most of my work for me. This HOA has violated about a dozen different statutes. The fines they're levying are excessive and unrelated to any actual damages. The restrictions they're trying to enforce aren't supported by the covenants, and this audit request is going to be very interesting." "You think there's something there?" I asked. "Put it this way," Michael said. "I've handled about 50 HOA cases in my career. Every time a board fights an audit request this hard, we find irregularities. Usually it's a board member or property manager skimming funds. Sometimes it's favoritism, where certain homeowners get preferential treatment. Either way, they wouldn't be this defensive if everything was above board." He filed a formal petition with the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas, requesting an injunction against the HOA enforcing any fines against me, and compelling them to produce financial records for audit. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Patricia and the HOA board apparently decided to make an example of me. I came home from running errands one afternoon to find a bright orange notice stapled to my front door. It was a formal notice of lien, claiming that my unpaid fines totaled $4,500 with accumulated interest, and that the HOA was placing a lien on my property. The notice stated that if the debt wasn't satisfied within 90 days, the HOA would begin foreclosure proceedings. I called Michael immediately. "They're bluffing," he said after I read him the notice. "Well, they're trying to create a lien, but it won't hold up. You haven't had due process, the fines aren't valid, and they can't foreclose on a property for disputed charges. Don't worry about it." This actually helps our case because it shows they're acting in bad faith. "It's still stressful to have this hanging over my head," I admitted. "I understand," Michael said sympathetically, "but trust me, we're going to shut this down. I've already started deposing some of your neighbors who had similar issues. Their testimony is going to be very helpful." The court hearing arrived on a cold February morning. I dressed in a suit and met Michael at the courthouse at 8 a.m. Patricia was there with the HOA's lawyer, a middle-aged man named Gerald Stevens who looked bored and irritated to be handling what he probably considered a minor dispute. Judge Raymond Porter took the bench at 8:30, reviewed the filings quickly, and looked up with a skeptical expression. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said. "Mr. Barrett is being fined and threatened with foreclosure because he used a tractor to plow snow on his own property." "Your Honor, it's more complex than that," Gerald began. "I'm sure you think so," Judge Porter interrupted. "But I've read the filings, and that seems to be the crux of it. Mr. Torres, walk me through your argument." Michael stood and delivered a clear, concise explanation of the situation, including the sheriff's deputy's confirmation that my actions were legal, the HOA's retaliatory escalation of fines, and the pattern of harassment documented by other residents. He submitted the folder of neighbor testimonies as evidence, along with copies of the HOA's annual reports showing financial discrepancies. Judge Porter took his time reviewing the documents. Finally, he looked at Gerald. "Counselor, does your client have any evidence that Mr. Barrett's use of his tractor caused actual damages to the community or violated any valid covenant?" Gerald shuffled his papers. "Your Honor, the HOA has broad authority to maintain community standards through its covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Mr. Barrett agreed to those terms when he purchased his property." "That's not what I asked," Judge Porter said dryly. "I asked if you have evidence of damages or a valid violation. I've read the covenants. There's no prohibition against farm equipment on agricultural property, which Mr. Barrett's land is zoned as. There's no noise violation per county ordinance. So what exactly is the legal basis for these fines? Gerald looked uncomfortable. The HOA board has interpreted the spirit of the covenants to prohibit this type of activity. The spirit, Judge Porter repeated. Counselor, you know as well as I do that contracts are interpreted by their explicit terms, not by what one party wishes they said. I'm going to grant the injunction. The HOA is prohibited from enforcing these fines or taking any action against Mr. Barrett's property. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to comply with the audit request within 30 days and to provide a complete accounting of all fines collected and disbursed for the past 5 years. Patricia audibly gasped behind me. Gerald tried one more time. Your Honor, the HOA has privacy concerns about disclosing detailed financial information. Then they should have thought about that before they started throwing around fines and threatening foreclosure, Judge Porter said sharply. The audit will be conducted by an independent certified public accountant, and the results will be provided to the court and to all homeowners who requested it. If the HOA wants to challenge this order, they can file an appeal, but the injunction stands immediately. We're adjourned. Michael and I walked out of the courtroom, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That went well, I said. Better than well, Michael said, grinning. Judge Porter doesn't mess around with HOAs that overstep. And he clearly thinks something fishy is going on with the finances, which is why he ordered the audit results reported to the court. That's unusual, and it means he wants oversight. The audit took 6 weeks to complete. Michael hired a forensic accountant named Sarah Williams, who specialized in investigating financial fraud. She requested every bank record, receipt, invoice, and financial document from the HOA for the past 5 years. Patricia and the board fought her at every step, requiring multiple court orders to compel production of documents, which only made them look more suspicious. I went back to my normal life, using my tractor whenever I needed to and ignoring the glares from Patricia whenever I saw her around the neighborhood. Several neighbors stopped by to thank me for standing up to the HOA, and a few even brought casseroles or baked goods. It felt good to be part of a community again, even if a significant portion of that community was dealing with an out-of-control board. In early April, Sarah finished her audit and requested a meeting with Michael and me at his office. She brought 3 large binders full of spreadsheets and documentation, and her expression was grim. "Gentlemen," she said, setting the binders on the conference table, "you were right to be suspicious. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA has significant financial irregularities that I believe constitute fraud and embezzlement." She opened the first binder and walked us through her findings. Over the past 5 years, the HOA had collected approximately $470,000 in regular dues, special assessments, and fines from homeowners. According to the annual reports provided to residents, this money had been spent on landscaping, common area maintenance, legal fees, and administrative costs. But Sarah's audit told a different story. The actual expenses for legitimate HOA business totaled less than $200,000. The remaining $270,000 had been siphoned off through a variety of schemes. Fake invoices from landscaping companies that didn't exist, inflated legal bills from Gerald Stevens for work that was never done, and most damning, regular payments to a consulting company called Meadowbrook Management Services, which turned out to be wholly owned by Patricia Dunmore. She was paying herself a consulting fee of $3,000 per month, Sarah explained, supposedly for property management services. but the HOA already paid a separate property management company for those services. Patricia's company didn't do anything except receive money. "That's embezzlement," I said, stunned. "That's exactly what it is," Sarah confirmed, "and it gets worse." When the HOA started issuing all these aggressive fines 3 years ago, right after Patricia became president, most of that fine revenue went straight to her consulting company. She was essentially creating violations to generate income for herself. Michael was taking notes rapidly. "This needs to go to the prosecutor's office immediately. This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is criminal fraud." The next day, Michael and Sarah met with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office and presented the audit findings. I wasn't involved in those meetings, but Michael kept me updated. The prosecutor assigned a detective to investigate, and within a week, they'd confirmed Sarah's findings and expanded the investigation to include Gerald Stevens, who had apparently been complicit in the scheme and taking kickbacks for facilitating it. The story broke on the news in late April. Channel 6 led with it, and Jennifer Garcia did another interview with me, this time focusing on how the audit had uncovered massive fraud. The footage of Patricia's smug face from the first interview, claiming the HOA was just trying to maintain standards, played in stark contrast to the allegations of embezzlement and theft from her neighbors. The community reaction was explosive. Homeowners flooded the next HOA meeting, demanding the immediate resignation of the entire board. Patricia didn't show up, apparently on advice of her lawyer. The other board members tried to claim they hadn't known what was happening, but nobody believed them. By the end of the meeting, all 4 remaining board members had resigned, and a group of homeowners, including Robert Chen, volunteered to serve as an interim board until proper elections could be held. In June, Patricia Dunmore was arrested and charged with 23 counts of theft and fraud. Gerald Stevens was also arrested on conspiracy charges. The prosecutor held a press conference announcing the charges, explaining that Patricia had stolen over $270,000 from her neighbors through a systematic scheme of fake companies and excessive fines. The case went to trial in September. I testified about the tractor incident and the escalation of fines, establishing the pattern of harassment. Sarah Williams provided expert testimony about the fraudulent financial records. Dozens of homeowners testified about being fined for petty violations and feeling pressured to pay rather than fight. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Patricia was found guilty on all counts. Gerald was convicted on 12 counts of conspiracy and fraud. At sentencing in November, Patricia received 8 years in prison and was ordered to pay full restitution of $270,000 plus court costs. Gerald received 4 years and was disbarred. Judge Porter, who handled the sentencing, didn't mince words. "Miss Dunmore, you were entrusted with the responsibility of serving your community and maintaining the common welfare of your neighbors. Instead, you treated them as a personal bank account, inventing violations and issuing excessive fines solely to enrich yourself. You betrayed the trust of everyone who lived in Meadowbrook Estates, and you caused immeasurable stress and financial hardship to families who were just trying to live their lives. This was calculated, deliberate fraud carried out over years, and it demands a significant punishment." The restitution money was distributed to all the homeowners who'd paid fines or special assessments during Patricia's tenure. I received about $4,000, which more than covered my legal expenses. More importantly, the new HOA board, led by Robert as president, immediately set about reforming the covenants and reducing the board's authority to something reasonable. They eliminated most of the petty restrictions, reduced dues by 30%, and established a transparent process for any future rule changes that required homeowner approval. The Meadowbrook Estates Community Center, ironically, was renamed the Henderson Community Center in honor of the previous owner of my property, the elderly farmer who'd held out against the development for so long. They put up a plaque noting that his independent spirit had inspired the community to reclaim its neighborhood from authoritarian overreach. As for me, I still live in my house on Oakwood Lane, and I still use my John Deere tractor whenever I need to. Last winter, after a particularly heavy snowstorm, I spent an entire Saturday morning plowing not just my driveway, but also the driveways of 5 elderly neighbors who couldn't do it themselves. Nobody complained about the noise or the equipment. In fact, several people came out to thank me and offer me hot coffee. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up for what's right, even when it seems easier to just go along with unreasonable demands. If I'd paid that first fine and stopped using my tractor, Patricia would have kept harassing residents and stealing money. The tractor incident was relatively minor, but it was the spark that exposed a much larger problem. I've been contacted by homeowners in other communities dealing with similar HOA overreach, asking for advice on how to fight back. My answer is always the same. Document everything, know your rights, don't be afraid to ask for an audit, and get a good lawyer who specializes in HOA law. Most importantly, talk to your neighbors. Patricia's scheme worked because she isolated people and made them feel like they were the only ones being targeted. Once we started comparing notes and standing together, her house of cards collapsed quickly. Ohio ended up passing new legislation in 2026, largely inspired by the Meadowbrook Estates case, that put additional restrictions on HOA authority and made financial audits mandatory every 2 years. The law also established a state ombudsman office to handle HOA complaints and investigate abuse. It won't prevent all problems, but it's a step in the right direction. On a personal note, I've gotten more involved in the community since everything settled down. I joined the volunteer fire department, and I've been helping Robert and the new board plan improvements to the common areas that will actually benefit residents rather than just generating revenue. We're putting in a new playground, upgrading the walking trails, and installing better lighting in the parking areas. It turns out that when an HOA actually serves its community, instead of trying to control it, good things happen. My property has become something of a local landmark. People driving through the neighborhood slow down to look at the barn and the tractor, and I've had families stop by to ask if their kids can see it up close. I usually say yes, and I'll spend a few minutes explaining how it works and why farming equipment is important even in suburban areas. The kids love it, and their parents appreciate that someone is teaching them something practical. The incident with the tractor seems almost quaint now, looking back on everything that came after. At the time, I was just annoyed about being hassled for clearing snow from my driveway. I had no idea it would lead to a criminal investigation, prison sentences, major legislative reform, and a complete transformation of my neighborhood. Life is funny that way. Sometimes the smallest acts of standing up for yourself can have ripples that go far beyond anything you imagined. Jennifer Garcia at Channel 6 did a follow-up piece on the 1-year anniversary of Patricia's arrest, interviewing me and several other residents about how the neighborhood had changed. It was gratifying to see how many people felt like they'd reclaimed their community. Property values, which Patricia had claimed to be protecting, had actually increased significantly once word got out that the oppressive HOA regime was gone. Turns out people are willing to pay more for a home where they don't have to worry about being fined for planting the wrong flowers. The story also inspired other communities to take a harder look at their own HOAs. Several nearby neighborhoods requested audits and found similar, if smaller scale, financial irregularities. A few HOA board members resigned when they realized they'd be facing increased scrutiny. It felt like a small victory for common sense and property rights. As I write this, it's been almost 2 years since that snowy morning when I fired up my tractor and unknowingly started a chain of events that would change my life and my community. The John Deere is still in my barn, still running perfectly, and still ready whenever I need it. I've added a few attachments, including a brush hog for cutting tall grass and a small trailer for hauling supplies. My property is in the best shape it's been in years. I've also become something of an accidental activist for HOA reform. I get invited to speak at community meetings and local government hearings about the importance of balancing community standards with individual property rights. It's not something I ever planned to do, but it feels important. Too many people sign HOA agreements without understanding what they're agreeing to, and too many HOA boards abuse their authority because they can. My message is simple. Your home is your castle. You have a right to use your property as you see fit, as long as you're not hurting anyone else. HOAs have a legitimate purpose in maintaining common areas and handling shared expenses, but they don't have the right to micromanage your life or turn your neighborhood into a police state. And if they're collecting money from you, they have an obligation to be transparent about where that money goes. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to in this case, but it took time, effort, and money to get there. Not everyone has the resources to fight an HOA in court, which is why the legislative reforms are so important. The State Ombudsman Office has already helped dozens of homeowners resolve disputes without going to court, and the mandatory audits have made it much harder for board members to engage in fraud. I still see the effects of Patricia's scheme in small ways. Some residents are still wary of the HOA, even though it's under completely new management. The trust that was broken will take time to rebuild. But slowly, steadily, people are engaging with the community again, attending meetings, volunteering for committees, and working together to make Meadowbrook Estates a better place to live. Robert Chen, who's been an excellent HOA president, announced he'll be stepping down next year after serving 2 terms. There's already healthy competition for the position, with several qualified candidates who are committed to transparent, limited governance. It's a far cry from the authoritarian regime that Patricia ran, and it gives me hope for the future. As for Patricia herself, she's serving her sentence at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. I don't take any pleasure in that. I never wanted to ruin anyone's life. I just wanted to clear snow from my driveway without being hassled. But she made her choices, and she has to live with the consequences. The fact that she showed no remorse at trial, continuing to insist she'd done nothing wrong, made it clear that she still doesn't understand the harm she caused. Gerald Stevens is at a minimum security facility in Pickaway County. He apparently cooperated with prosecutors after his conviction, providing information about other potentially fraudulent HOA arrangements he'd facilitated. That cooperation may reduce his sentence, but he'll never practice law again, and his reputation is destroyed. As it should be. Lawyers are supposed to be advocates for their clients, not co-conspirators in theft. The restitution payments continue to trickle in. Patricia's assets were seized and sold, including her house, which ironically was also in Meadowbrook Estates. A young couple with 2 kids bought it, and they've been wonderful neighbors. They planted a huge vegetable garden in the backyard, something that definitely would have been prohibited under the old regime, and they share their produce with everyone around them. It's exactly the kind of thing that makes a neighborhood feel like a community. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently, knowing what I know now. Honestly, I wouldn't change much. I could have just paid the initial fine and avoided all the stress and conflict, but that would have been wrong. Not just wrong for me, but wrong for everyone else who was being victimized by Patricia's scheme. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight, even when it's difficult, because it's the right thing to do. The tractor incident will probably follow me for the rest of my life. When I tell people where I live, there's about a 50-50 chance they'll say, "Oh, isn't that the neighborhood where the HOA was embezzling money?" Or, "Wait, are you the tractor guy?" I've made peace with that. If being the tractor guy means I helped expose corruption and reform a broken system, I'll wear that label proudly. I've also developed an unexpected expertise in HOA law and community governance. I've been consulted by legislators drafting reforms, interviewed by researchers studying HOA abuse, and asked to review proposed covenants for new developments. It's become a strange second career, one I never anticipated. But there's a real need for people who understand both the legitimate purposes of HOAs and the dangers of unchecked authority. Looking ahead, I'm optimistic about the future of Meadowbrook estates and communities like it. The reforms we've implemented, both locally and at the state level, create a framework for balanced governance that respects property rights while still maintaining community standards. The mandatory audits prevent financial abuse. The reduced board authority prevents micromanagement. And the increased transparency ensures that residents know what's happening with their money and their neighborhood. My property continues to be my refuge and my joy. I've expanded my garden, added a small workshop in the barn, and even adopted a dog, a golden retriever named Baxter who loves riding on the tractor with me. The simple act of maintaining my own land, clearing my own driveway, and living my life without unreasonable interference has taken on a deeper meaning after everything that happened. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I'll sit on my porch and look out over my 3 acres, watching the sun set behind the tree line, and I'll think about how different things could have been. If I'd been intimidated by Patricia's threats, if I'd paid the fines and given up my rights, if I'd never requested that audit, the neighborhood would still be under her thumb, money would still be disappearing, and families would still be living in fear of petty violations and excessive fines. Instead, we have a community that's stronger, more transparent, and more united than ever before. We have laws that protect homeowners from abuse. We have a system that works when people are willing to use it. And we have a shared understanding that our homes and our neighborhoods belong to us, not to power-hungry board members who see their position as a way to control others or enrich themselves. The John Deere tractor, the machine that started all of this, still sits in my barn. It's more than just a piece of equipment now. It's a symbol of property rights, of standing up to bullies, of the importance of community involvement, and of the power of ordinary people to demand accountability from those in authority. Every time I fire it up, I remember that morning when Patricia confronted me in my driveway, absolutely certain of her authority and her righteousness. And I remember the look on her face in court when the verdict came down, finally understanding that she'd gone too far. The story of the Meadowbrook estates, HOA, serves as a cautionary tale for both sides. For HOA boards, it's a reminder that their authority comes from the community they serve, not from some inherent right to control others. They're trustees, not tyrants, and they have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of all homeowners. For residents, it's a reminder to stay engaged, ask questions, demand transparency, and never be afraid to challenge authority when it's being abused. I never set out to be a whistleblower or a community organizer or a spokesperson for HOA reform. I just wanted to clear snow from my driveway using equipment that was perfectly legal and appropriate for my property. But sometimes life pushes you into roles you never expected, and you have to decide whether you're going to rise to the challenge or walk away. I chose to rise to it, and I'm proud of what we accomplished together. The ripple effects continue to this day. I receive emails and messages from people across Ohio and even other states, telling me they were inspired to challenge their own HOAs or demand audits, or simply push back against unreasonable rules. Some of those challenges have succeeded, leading to reformed boards and improved governance. Others are still ongoing. But the important thing is that people are no longer accepting abuse and overreach as just the price of living in an HOA community. As winter approaches again, I'm already preparing the tractor for snow removal season. The blade is sharpened, the hydraulics are checked, and the engine runs smoothly. This year, I'll be plowing not just my driveway but also the community center parking lot, with the full blessing of the HOA board. It's a volunteer position, and I'm happy to do it. That's what community is supposed to be about. People helping each other, not petty tyrants extracting fines for imaginary violations. The transformation of Meadowbrook, estates from a neighborhood living in fear of its HOA, to a genuine community working together, is still ongoing. Trust takes time to rebuild, and some residents remain skeptical of any kind of organized governance after their experiences with Patricia. But slowly, meeting by meeting, project by project, we're proving that it's possible to have reasonable rules and standards without authoritarianism. It's possible to maintain property values without harassment, and it's possible to have an HOA that actually serves its community rather than ruling over it. My life has changed in ways I never could have anticipated that snowy morning. I've made new friends, found a new purpose, and learned important lessons about justice, community, and the importance of standing up for what's right. The cost was stress, time, and legal fees, but the rewards have been immeasurable. I helped expose a criminal conspiracy, reform a broken system, and reclaim my neighborhood from someone who saw it as her personal fiefdom. And through it all, the John Deere tractor has remained a constant, solid and reliable, ready to work whenever needed. It's a fitting metaphor for the whole experience. Sometimes the simplest tools, the most basic rights, and the most ordinary actions can become catalysts for extraordinary change. You just have to be willing to start the engine and get to work, no matter who tries to stop you. The story of how an HOA called the cops when I used my tractor to plow snow, and how the officer confirmed it was perfectly legal on private property, became so much more than a simple dispute about equipment. It became a story about corruption, justice, community, and the fundamental American principle that your home is your castle, and no one has the right to take that away from you through petty tyranny or financial fraud. It's a story I'm proud to be part of, and one that will hopefully inspire others to defend their rights and demand accountability from those in positions of authority.